are significantly lower than our neighbors. So it's one that the city made a decision at contract time to raise some of those wages, and therefore the increase, which I think was appropriate. Other than that, we did combine a couple of items as far as line items, and that was a recommendation from Jeff. There really isn't anything remarkable, I think, as you go through the list of different items that I think from our perspective it's relatively simple. But that being said, if you do have questions on any of those, please let me know.
Yeah, I want to point out, going into the overtime, and that's going to lead to our discussion here in the very near future about those 3 additional bodies that the previous council put in place to maintain maintain the levels on these overtime. And I think it's worth pointing out, looking at where we were at a year ago and the difference that has made. So, I mean, I realize looking at this, we're budgeting $300,000. In the grand scheme of things, look at where we ended up in 2019, which was $737 in overtime. So I think it's worthy to point out, because we're getting ready to have that discussion on extending that for another year, and I think it was a good decision. I think that.
Mayor, I appreciate you bringing that up. That was one that we did this as a bit of a test case, realizing that barring any significant issues, we were going to have some pretty positive results. Jeff, I think, was very conservative with the numbers that we used, and realistically, in light of where we're at today, some of the numbers, had we have not done that, would have exceeded our amounts 2 years ago.
Oh, absolutely.
Easily. So thank you again to the previous council. Thank you again to all of you for considering that, and I would urge you to consider doing it again. Are there any questions on any of these amounts, any of these line items, anything that I can shed any light on it? I don't want to say that there's anything there that wasn't there before. There's really no surprises. We do load fairly heavy on the training side of things for our newer firefighters. That's by far our biggest expense, both in equipping them and also training them, both between the fire academy and the paramedics certifications. There's a lot of expense there on the front end, and I realize that. Realistically, moving forward, that's an expense that is invaluable in a 35-year career. Those are expenses that we go all the way on the expenses, but it's money very well spent. I know it's a lot of money, but I appreciate past support and future support for the direction that we're headed.
Yeah, and I just want to point out too, on the ambulance service fees, we increase those every year. And I know Chief Beck worked on that on the previous council. We agreed to do that. We had taken a look at it, I don't know, at budget time 2-3 years ago or whatever it was, and determined we hadn't raised our fees in I don't know how many years at the time. So we weren't even keeping up with those costs. So we've that's something we do every year.
At a minimum, every year is probably realistic, and I don't think there's any reason to shy away from that.
Yeah.
Chief, I'm looking at one question. Medical billing, is that a factor? I mean, it's going up just marginally here.
Yes, sir.
Is a factor of, I mean, what is that? What's behind that?
What's behind that is it's a 4.5% fee, essentially, that we pay that vendor to help us out with ambulance billing. Realizing that our revenues are steadily going up, that fee is going to steadily go up.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the council for the chief? Mr. Norris appears to have left, so no questions from the public. Anything else, Chief? Obviously, once again, I want to point out the capital requests are not included in this evening's discussion. That'll be a topic for 2 weeks out. And the fire department will be bringing forward their request. So. Go ahead, Jeff. Anything? You look like you had something to add to the...
Nope, I'm good.
All right, well, Chief.
Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it. And we will we'll move along to the police department. And just to share with our representatives from the police department, I did provide each elected official a copy of what Mallory provided me earlier this week in regards to the records clerk, because I know that's part of the discussion here in the budget.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Doesn't want us flipping pages.
This is the detail, actually. This is all the supporting detail.
Oh, good.
All right, gentlemen, whenever you're ready.
We'll go over this, but Deputy Chief Broderick really did an excellent job on getting the information available here.
Can't hear you, Chief. Is your
Okay.
thing?
As I say, Deputy Chief Broderick did an excellent job getting all the information together for you. So that's why he's up here as basically my subject matter expert. He's done it for years, so I know he's going to give you all the information you need. Also, Mallory's here in case we have any questions in the records area that we're at.
Okay, perfect.
Really, I mean, the only thing we're kind of with the salaries are kind of going to be set where they're at now. There could be some changes eventually, depending upon the contract that we're still in negotiations with. But major areas where we kind of did some changes is,
Chief, we can't hear you.
oh,
very
sorry about
well. I
that.
don't know.
I'm sitting back away from it,
Okay.
so. Actually, I'm going to probably let Rich go over where he actually changed some of the larger items, so, Rich?
Basically, what you've got is, there's a 4% decrease in the salaries. That's because we've had some people at higher wages that have left, and then the new people coming in won't have hit those higher steps in that pay. So there's a decrease there in that line item. Moving down to the grant overtime, that's actually based on a reimbursement from the state of Illinois for traffic grants, and that's what we were allotted this year from the state of Illinois for those.
Just real quick, Chief, before we move on, I want to point out on the police salary, so we're going to have a swearing in of 4 new individuals here at the end of the month, and that will bring us up to speed. Honestly, we'll have all positions filled currently on the patrol side here at the end of the month, so, and that's all accounted for in this budget, so I wanted to make that point. So 2 weeks from now, as you're seeing 4 new guys get sworn in, you're like, oh, wait a minute, bait and switch. That's all accounted for, so.
The next one is clerical wages. That one has a 49% increase, but that is actually the wages of our administrative assistant to the chief, our records supervisor, the 2 records clerks, and then the addition of, as opposed to going with another records clerk, having a receptionist to kind of take away from the window and some of the menial tasks that they do that take away from their focus on being able to do the rest of the job in that room. Some of those things don't require the level of expertise and the working knowledge of the program, that if we can alleviate that, we're hoping that'll have some sort of an impact, but it's going to take a while to see once we get Angela released from her training too, where we're at with that.
So I want to point out, so originally when dispatch consolidated, just to give everyone a history on how we've landed on this, we opted for 2 records clerks at the time. The previous council, we also approved body cameras. And one of the questions the night that we approved the body cameras to join the grant in Peoria was, what are the costs on the backside? We didn't have an answer. We've not done it. So FOIA's on the body cameras, and I've shared some information that Mallory put together on the council's consideration on how much time that consumes. That in itself has turned in, honestly, into a full-time position. So the ask here, the council supported adding a 3rd records clerk, which she is currently not fully trained, but getting up to speed rather quickly. So we also get what comes back to us on reports and kind of where we stand with the reports, which also goes above us to the county and how frequently we turn in the reports, there's timelines involved. So a recent conversation led to this receptionist position, and that would be the ask to be included in this budget. Is what that individual will do, which we didn't take into account at the time, was window service. And she's also put in there how much time that takes away. So right now, it's, the records clerks are taken away from their job to go up and handle the window service. So the thought process here is having that receptionist, they would handle all the counter business, if you will, all the window business that dispatch used to handle on our behalf, so we can focus and get up to speed on the record side of it. But FOIA's consuming, the average citizen would have no idea. I mean, it's just mind-blowing, the amount of FOIAs the city receives. City clerk knows this, police department knows this full well. It's very time-consuming, and it takes these individuals away from their regular duties to perform this. So I think it's worth pointing out, and that's why we provided the additional information for your considerations.
And Mayor, one of the other things that didn't come around is the state law on expungements. There are several different municipalities that actually hired a full-time person for expungements, so that was one of the things that was not taken into consideration when it became law in January, that we now have to make sure we're up to date doing the expungement, so now that just takes additional time. But I do know of places that have hired people just for that purpose of actually also doing the expungements.
Chief, may I ask, during the expungements or the body cams, are we able to take some of the cannabis taxes and put toward that and take it out of this fund and use it?
So that's a good question. That's another thing, and that's on the revenue side. We have not included any of those revenues in this budget yet because we don't yet know what that number is going to be. The only number we know, honestly, is the
cannabis excise tax.
which amounts to like $15,000.
Yeah, it's like 80 cents per capita. It's about 15, 16 grand.
That would be your 8% share that the state made sound like 8% is going to be a big number. So we don't yet know what those revenues will be that are going to be generated because that tax, what we're looking for, will really kick in July 1. So just to be conservative, but to answer your question, the goal is to tackle some of this stuff that is unfunded at the state level, dropped on our lap, and that's why we approved the taxing of the cannabis to help offset these costs. So to answer your question, yeah, absolutely. Once we know what those revenues are going to be, they're going to be utilized to offset some of these costs. So,
But once the expungements are done with the pot, then they're done, right?
yeah, that side of it.
I mean, that's part of it, but part of the thing, there's also still, we have to get into it. There's juvenile expungements, there's other things that we are currently behind on because of the time consuming that we have for the other things. So like I said, we are currently running behind on all the expungements.
But I think Commissioner Decker, or not Decker, Sutherland, his point is, when you're done with those, that is a one-time thing, expungements, whether you're behind or not, but, yeah.
Yes.
I think in the future, whatever we have to do this year is what we'll need to do. I think going forward, and I believe you agree as well, we should outline how we would like to spend whatever revenue we do receive, maybe by percentages, and then we can spend that in the rears. So whatever we receive this year, we will then show us what we can spend next year in whichever areas we choose. I believe is a good idea to do it. So therefore, we're not committing ourselves to a certain amount of money and then wondering if that amount were to or not to come in.
Absolutely. And then just to touch on this in defense of Mallory, because I know she's sitting there quietly like, come on, explain some more. On this receptionist, the individual's not just going to be a receptionist. There's other job responsibilities that Mallory's going to put forward a job description and share that with us. So there's more to come on that. But, the whole body camera thing, I'll tell you, knowing what I know now sitting in this seat and looking at these enormous costs and responsibilities attributed with that, they ask anything you regret. I'd like to go back, and I wish I had those numbers because it may have changed my position on bringing that on. That is a 5-year agreement. So, maybe at the tail end of that agreement, this council, it'll be on this watch. We have that discussion as to whether or not are we committed to doing this moving forward. And who knows, by that time, it may be a state mandate, which wouldn't surprise me either, so.
It was certainly something that we all wanted it, I think, for the reasons that were out there. The
Right.
transparency and to make sure that everybody's doing the right thing, and also a lot of times to protect our officers. Unfortunately, there are just many expenses and many things that came along with it that no one expected. I mean, our police department did a good job of trying to give us all the information at the time. It's just, we just didn't know.
Well, they didn't know.
What all to expect.
Okay.
And one of the things we want to point out is we did have our dispatchers there till anywhere between June and July before they transferred over. And at that point in time, we had 12 dispatchers working 24 hours a day that also did dispatching and the records. We now have 2 records clerk who do 8 hours a day or more. They come in on their days off and do some things like that to, try and do the work of 12 people. And I commend them on the work that they are doing right now. But it is, like I said, stressful, and like I said, we went from 12 to 2.
Yeah, and I think people would be surprised, a community our size, the number of calls for service we have in the police department. It's above average. Like I said, it goes back into earlier comments in another department budget, which is we're a major thoroughfare, so people would be surprised, so.
Can I ask a question along those lines? And I could probably do the math, but I know that you sit on the TC3 board. I'm looking, obviously, we don't have telecommunicator salaries anymore or not requested because we no longer have those individuals in the department. But I know, and I don't see it here, but I know it's in the fire, that the fees we pay to TC3.
Oh, they're in here.
They're-
Yeah, they're under.
They're somewhere.
It's
they're
contractual
underlying
services.
contractual
Under
services,
020.
020 on page 8.
As far as our bottom line goes, did that move save the city money, or did that move cost us money?
Well, here's the deal. I mean, from my perspective, to be completely honest with you, and I've shared this openly on the TC3 board for 2 years, a lot of people looked at the larger entities, those that had the dispatch centers. We had a lot of overhead costs that we basically ate, if you will. I hate to use the word subsidized, but reality is that's what it was. We subsidized some other agencies, if you will, municipalities, in providing that service to them. So from a cost-saving perspective, when you look at the fees that are associated with what we had listed as our cost, it's not a true number, because we look at the clerk's positions that we had to go and, basically hire on, bring on to fulfill the duties that our dispatchers did at the time they were employees is way different. So when you total all that together, you're not going to find it all in these fees. Honestly, you'd have to do the math. Did it really save East Peoria money? I'd be hard pressed to think it did at the end of the day, but that's yet to be seen. There's no question that overall, and I look at the TC3 budget, and when that consultant submitted the plan to the state, we just had this conversation in the board meeting Friday. When you look at the budget that he submitted, the state wanted a 5-year plan. What are those costs going to be? How are you going to fund that? And actually, TC3 has come in underneath the budget that was submitted to the state. So it's not like there's any wasteful spending. Some agencies saw a decline, certainly saved them a lot of money. Others, it was painful, because now for the first time, the larger agencies, including the county and the city of Pekin, that subsidize the smaller agencies for a long time, these true costs are coming out, and everyone's got to pay their share. So depends on who you ask.
Thanks.
Not the best answer, but I'm just being honest with you.
Well, I just know, I saw
Yeah.
the fees in there, and then I saw,
Right.
obviously, we don't have those salaries, and I just
Right.
didn't know how that all figured out.
Yeah, good question.
But if anybody has any questions on the information that was provided by Mallory, that's why she's here. She's pretty much our expert in that area also.
Okay. Chief?
The next line item, 018, is for animal control. That's remained flat for several years. They're on a different fiscal year than we are, but I don't anticipate any changes in that. There haven't been for several years. So we put that in at the same, and they don't anticipate any changes. Not to say that the county board couldn't change that for them, though. The next one is that contractual services, the 020. That is actually the dispatch services, but through conversation with Commissioner Hill and Mr. Becker, it came down to moving yearly fees out of our dues subscriptions line item out of 035 into that. So a lot of those fees were moved into this, and that makes that come up to the number that it is.
Yeah, so those aren't just strictly dispatch fees, because I had the same question. I saw that, and I thought, uh-oh, no, I know for a fact that dispatch fees weren't anything near that, so that made more sense.
The printing has an increase. It says it's got a 25% increase, and the reason for that is I actually took the average over 5 years of what we had been having, and every year we're above it. So I just wanted to increase that to put it in a more realistic perspective of what we spend in a year with printing. Some years it's a little higher, some years a little lower, but that should be close to what we anticipate spending on that. Postage, there's just a decrease. I took that same thing for the average, and we have a decrease there. The training and meeting expenses on the very back page is something I just received this afternoon in the booklets that I gave you. And it's basically just letting you know about the problem that the MTUs are having throughout the state. The state passed some legislation that took away surcharge funds from ticketing that is actually the only funding source for the mobile training units that train all the police officers throughout the state. So in doing so, you've got mobile training units that are consolidating multiples into one, and their budgets are being cut to where they're cutting classes. We had people scheduled for a class that we got notice about a week before it was going, 2 weeks or so before it was going to happen. They canceled the class on us. So we're having to look to outside areas to provide those classes and that training. And that comes with increased fees of having to pay a fee for an instructor that usually is picked up by the MTU itself. So we're keeping that. It's flat compared to last year. So there's no increase there. We're hoping that that actually maintains and that we're able to get all of that training done for that cost.
And one of the things we want to point out is, prior to this, we just sent one of our recruits down to the academy. Prior to this, any recruit or academy training was reimbursed by the Illinois Training and Standards Board straight to the academies. Now, because of the deficit, we now have to pay up front for that training in hopes of being reimbursed by the Illinois Training and Standards Board at a later date. We just sent a check for approximately $6,200 that we had not anticipated, and we'll also be footing the bill for the new recruits that we're sending down there. I've been in contact with Senator Weaver and also sent emails to Representative Eunice. One of the things that they're asking us to do is contact our state representatives to look for another funding source to hopefully bring us back up to where they're now paying for these. As Deputy Chief Broderick said, they're basically cutting any class that would cost them any money at the MTUs. Unfortunately, we are mandated by the state that we have to do continuous training. In those cases that they might have brought classes to the MTUs, we're going to have to, until there's some funding, we may have to look outside of the area, which may mean one of the larger training places is in Indianapolis. That will now, instead of us being able to send 4 officers to the MTU, we may have to send 2 officers to Indianapolis, which will now cost us for hotel, per diem, and other things. This is one of those that was not anticipated, but because of the way that they changed the law, everybody across the state's being affected by that.
Chief, here would be my recommendation. I knew this, and I know you shared it in the Fire and Police Commission meeting with those commissioners. Could you send the elected officials some information on that? Because I would strongly encourage these guys to reach out to our local representatives at the state level as well, and maybe all of us together, we can help apply a little pressure.
Yeah, I spoke with one of the members of the Illinois Training and Standards Board, and I know that they're looking to try and maybe change the way they had the last law, but they're probably looking for another funding source. So any assistance we can get from our local officials to our state representatives understand, like I said, this is not just about police departments, it's about municipalities, because the money in the end comes out of all of our pockets to do that. So this is not just affecting East Peoria, it's affecting everywhere in the state. But as we said, this was money that was unanticipated at the beginning of our funding last year to have to spend $6,200 per recruit. And if we don't spend that money, it's a good investment for us, because then on the back end, we end up having to pay overtime and other issues. So we're hoping we will get reimbursed, but they can't guarantee us that we'll get reimbursed for all the money that we put out. So, yeah, anything we can get from our local officials to our state representatives, like I said, I know Senator Weaver was quite aware of it. Representative Eunice is aware of it, because I got contacted by his office. And like I said, I've known Senator Weaver and spoke with him, and I know that they're aware of it.
I'll be worthy to reach out to Senator Kaler and Senator Brady as well. They represent East Peoria, so, yeah. All right. Thank you, Chief. Chief?
Moving on down, going to the clothing allowance, there's a 30% decrease there. Our ballistic vests that we have a 5-year replacement cycle on, and that's just a manufacturer's replacement cycle. At 5 years, they don't back the warranty anymore. So each year we have a certain number. This year, that 30% decreases because we don't have as many as we had last year. So that's where the 30% decrease comes in there. Dues, subscriptions, publications, that's remaining flat, as are utilities, which that's paid out of City Hall. We don't ever actually see the bill on that. There's a 25 or a 50% decrease in the maintenance and repair of buildings. Robert Cole and I collaborate yearly when we go through the budget, and this year, based on the projects that we have, he believes that $25,000 will cover what we have to get done this year. Moving on down, we have flat for the equipment. We have a 10% decrease for the maintenance and repair of vehicles. We're hoping that by getting some of these Impalas out of the fleet and by getting new vehicles in there, that we're actually going to have a decrease there. The bigger thing of that is we're no longer using an outside vendor. We're using the mechanics at Public Works to take care of the things. So paying for the parts there, we're looking at hopefully a substantial decrease in that.
And Chief, I know the request for the vehicles coming up in 2 weeks, and I know you've been good about doing this in the past, to provide a list of the Impalas. I know we currently have 8 Durangos on order this fiscal year, which hopefully we'll see in the next month or so. That'll eliminate half that list, but if you don't mind sharing the same information you did last year when you bring that forward, it'd be
That
very
was
helpful.
actually compiled today. I'll have the list of what their lifetime maintenance has been and what the last year has been.
Okay, thank you.
Also moving down, everything else remains flat till you see the 20% increase for ISP fingerprinting. That's just because we've had a rise in people coming in for fingerprinting for liquor licenses, business licenses, things of that nature. And then there is a 14% increase for operating supplies. And that is, basically, that's just the averaged out over 5 years. Again, we have gone over that several years, and that's just to bring a more realistic area to where we're actually at with our spending on that. And the last thing you'll see is the operating equipment purchases, that 100% decrease. That's, we no longer use that line item there. And then also, you'll see a 50% increase for the DUI fund expenses. That is actually statutorily controlled money that can only be spent in certain ways. And I put that in there ultimately to help for purchases of equipment for the vehicles so that the outright vehicle purchase itself does not exceed the money that we are allotted through the capital budget. And it saves a little bit of that capital money for other uses. The K-9 expense drug fund, that is also statutorily controlled. There's a 37% decrease there, and that's because in January, we retired the second K-9 team. So we only have the one team at this point in time, so we expect, obviously, that we're not going to have the training expense or the food expense and veterinary bills for the dog. And that is all that we have there, and then the police vehicle fund remains flat at $25,000.
I appreciate it, and once again, I mean, when you look at these numbers on the operating thing, I can't stress it enough. All these departments have worked very diligently to be as lean as they possibly can. Any questions for the chief?
I do, and you may have already talked about it while I was taking some notes, I might have missed it, but I know in your description, under line item descriptions, it says overtime, $282,139. Look back at the actual item number, overtime, you have projected $349,241. You look back at 2019, actual $339,368, but then the budgeted, again, is at $250. Last year is at $240.
I'll own this one. Had this conversation with the chief today, so going back, oh my gosh, and I'd go back the last 4 years I've been elected, and you'd know, you go back longer than I do. We've been short-staffed in the police department. The 4 years I've served on here, and we are just now, and that's what I'm saying, by the end of the month, we'll be fully staffed for the first time since I can remember. Of course, you're going to have injuries and whatnot. So in discussions today, I felt it was imperative to back that number down. I realize historically, you look at the last number of years, and it's hard to do that because we've been short-staffed, and of course, you're going to play catch-up. But, yeah, that one, the mayor owns.
Well, I thought that might be what it was, and I am supportive of that, because it's tough when you work short staff. It's not like you just go without, so you still have a minimum staffing level that you have to obtain, and so it costs us more. So I'm anxious for us to get back up to full staffing as well.
That, and two, on the overtime, one thing that it is important to point out, for example, like on the festival parade and whatnot, some of these numbers fluctuate, do they not? Because we pull that from other funds to cover those costs. So
Yeah,
that could be another reason to, take a look at these projections. Sometimes they're a little,
Yeah, that gets paid out of ours out front, and
Right.
then is handled through Mr. Becker for the rest of that, for the actual reimbursement behind the scene part. We also, at one point, and I'm sure you're aware of this, Commissioner, not only were we short those 4 bodies, we had an extensive number of people that were on injury. So at one point in time, we had an entire shift, number-wise, of people not working. So that, of course, contributed to those 2 high years of the numbers, kind of really blowing that out of the water.
any other comments or questions for the chief? Mr. Norris, do you have any questions for the police department? None? Okay. Thank you all. I appreciate everything.
I
Yeah,
would just point out, in the packet that I gave you, there is just a description of all the line items, just so that you're aware of, if you have any questions of anything that comes out of a certain line item, that description is in there, just to kind of help you understand what we actually pay out of those line items.
I did have one, actually, I started.
no, I'm just kidding.
Well, it should be quick, because it was the last line item, the police, and I went to your definition, police vehicle fund, and it actually has some reference to DUI in the account description. But over here in your write-up, it says it's just for the motorcycles and repairs?
That's all it's been used for.
That's what it's been used for, and some accident repairs that we didn't want, that we paid for after the insurance part was paid. We paid for the rest or our deductible, I guess you would say, out of that, to keep it from impacting out of our vehicle maintenance budget part.
Okay.
Very good. Well, thank you all. I appreciate the efforts. Good job. Next up, Mr. Livingston and Mr. Cole, Planning and Community Development to include buildings, maintenance, and inspections.
Very fine department, by the way, very fine.
Thank you, Ty.
That's
Can't say much
subjective,
about the
sir.
commissioner, but
Thanks.
thank you, Ty.
First off, let me start by thanking you for saving the best for last. We appreciate that. Had a good time enjoying everybody else's presentations. My sheet, and then Robert's going to follow me. Mine is probably one of the smaller budgets, maybe more on par with the clerk's office. I was just going to highlight, those areas where there's a change, and then certainly answer any questions. I also like to take the opportunity to kind of talk about a couple of things kind of down the line at the bottom of the sheet that I handed out. Touches upon, and I know we're not getting into capital tonight, but also touches upon a couple of other initiatives that we're working on or taking a look at that I wanted to at least take the opportunity to highlight and offer up.
Hey, Ty, my ask as we go through this is just keep us posted on which page. I understand you had this handout, but if you don't mind, just so we can,
Page 4.
page 4. Yeah.
Page what?
Page 4.
Page 4. Planning and development. Thank you.
And I'd say going down the line with mine, 035 is really the first area where there is a significant adjustment there. And I will identify that what we've got there is we have dues and subscriptions and the publications. And as I read that, maybe publications is not exactly the right place where we've been putting these items, but the publications here is what's driving this number. Publications would be things for meeting notices, for zoning board, for planning commission. We've had a couple of significant sales or transfers of properties that require a pretty sizable legal description or legal ad. And the pricing on those continues to climb kind of overall, but some of those have been several $100s to post in the paper. I know Morgan's seen the bills for them. As we work down the line, there was another significant adjustment with the maintenance and vehicle repair, and that's really driven by the vehicle that I drive has factory installed tires on it. Those are usually good for maybe about 30,000 miles, and we're getting about to that point. I'm going to rotate them one more time, but there's maybe an additional cost there, and hopefully I can keep those down because I won't buy what was on there. They're Michelins and a little pricey. So the other item that I would bring your attention to is GIS expenses, and this is probably one of the more significant ones. GIS has really evolved under Glenn Wetterow. It's made some real significant strides. We've got a really good utilization of it in public works, as well as some utilization with the police and the fire department and inspections as well too. So it's getting a lot more use, and so Glenn is only one individual, and so his capacity is to a certain extent. Largely what's driving this is some additional initiatives that Public Works has identified, some anticipated work for the fire department as well as inspections. Glenn can handle some component of it, but then there's some piece that we need to bring in outside expertise, whether it be skill set or more often it has to do with just capacity and the time to do it. So there was a more specific allocation list that I had provided to Commissioner Hill, and the mayor and I talked about it this afternoon, and certainly would welcome any questions about that.
The only, I don't necessarily have a question about the GIS because you explained it to me and I understand. Here's a question for the council, and this is one that's been kind of gone back and forth the last couple of years, and I would just like some clarity now we're at budget time. Farmers market. I'd like the perspective of the council as we head into the budget, and you'll see this is a budgeted item that falls under Ty, and people have done a good job trying to make this thing work. It has continued to struggle, and I would just like, as a council, to know where everybody stands. Do we continue with the farmers market, or is that something that, not to put anyone on the spot here, but it's budget time, and I don't need an answer tonight. I'm just saying, take a look at this before we approve the budget. It's no different than our earlier conversation with Public Works, what we need to do there with software and whatnot. But my ask is give this a consideration and let me know what your thoughts are as we move forward.
How do you feel about it, Ty?
I'm not sure it matters how I feel, but I appreciate the question. I mean, in the end, it's a great opportunity to bring the community together. It's something that it's evolved. I think that there are challenges with it, as the mayor points out, but it's ours. And I think it's something that, you know, we've strategically tried to not put it head-to-head with the Peoria Riverfront Market on Saturdays, although that is typically the ideal time for these markets. You know, we've got some ideas and things that we've been working on to try to continue to get that to evolve and attract more vendors as well as customers, something that Commissioner Hill and I have been talking about over the last month or so.
And I just, you know, I want to throw this out there, Ty, because I don't want you to feel like I'm throwing you guys have worked, man. You guys have given it 100%. Everybody involved in that, and I don't want to discount that. It's tough from my point of view. Everybody already had these established, and we were kind of limited on when and how we can do this. And what I've seen the last couple of years, and I'm not trying to discount it, it's gone more from a farmer's market to a craft show type of thing, and I don't want to discount that, but, I mean, it's a farmer's market. So either we're in and we're going to do a farmer's market, and I appreciate the effort, man. I feel bad even saying it, but I want to have these conversations need to be had. 'Cause I wanna
Living where
know
we're
what
at, I'm
direction we're
surprised
going.
we don't have more farmers that are out there. There seems to be a very, you know, select group that does this type of operation. And, you know, obviously you get a lot of them at the Peoria Riverfront Market. And it's been a challenge to get some of them to come or at least continue to be regulars. And I think it's kind of the chicken or the egg thing, not to use a farmer's market pun.
Ta-da-ta.
But you know, what's coming first? You know, you get the customer base first, or do you get the vendors? And, you know, if you don't have one or the other, you know, both suffer.
What,
I
Ty,
just-
go ahead, Commissioner.
Well, I was going to say, because Ty and I have discussed this, and he came to me, or, you know, some time ago, said, are we going to do this? And I support the farmer's market. And again, and actually, you know, it's interesting that Mayor Call just said it's become more of a craft, because I threw that and maybe even opened that door this year to Ty more so than, you know, brand it farmer's market, no, it's brand it whatever. Part of it is about bringing people down to that promenade. And again, our expense that we budget here is only $3,000. And as long as the vendors want to keep coming at that, and they do, you know, I'm willing to keep supporting that to try to provide something for the people. Now, I've always questioned our publication, our advertising of it, you know, is it enough? We've got some signs around the levee district, and if you get outside, I've asked people at work, hey, what do you think? And we don't have a lot, and we definitely don't even remotely begin to compete with the Saturday morning Peoria Farmers Market. But if you go over there, they have a lot more than just farmers market. I mean, you go over there and there's a coffee stand. You know, again, that has nothing to do, again, it's local-owned businesses, but, so, to me, I, again, open the doors, say, I'm open to more crafters being in there, if that's what's gonna bring people down to the promenade for the farmer's market or otherwise, or even while they're in town, they stop over here at Target and pick up something on the way through. So, that's just my take on it.
Yeah, just a question on these costs, these $3,000, and maybe it's a question for Mr. Becker as well. Is that all encompassing? Are we considering Teresa? Are we considering all the costs associated with the farmer's market? I was always under the impression they don't just fall under this line item, and maybe I'm mistaken. I'm just
So
curious.
there's no allocation for Teresa's time that's in this. This is just the setting up of the system, paying the entertainers, you know, the signage, those pieces, advertising.
So my question
That'd be
tied along with that, and I know it's not a lot of money, but it looks like in 18 it was $2,100, $1,800 in 19. Now we're at $3,000. So the price of it's gone, or what we're paying for it has gone up. And I know it's not a lot of money, but you know, 1,000 is when compared to 3,000 is a third of the cost. Why is it going up compared to previous years? Are we doing additional things to try to get people?
I will tell you that new for this year, one thing that we are working on is, we haven't done in the past, we've done strategic advertising to try to attract customers. One thing we're doing differently is trying to strategically attract vendors that we haven't done before. And so that's a new item that we initiated for this year. And so whether that goes in the budget right now, I don't know that that's the case. It's driving factor. I know that Teresa had looked for, this is Teresa Unzinger, who is our coordinator, there is a kind of a certain level you have to pay to get a decent act, a music act to come in. And for a period of time there, we were trying to, I wouldn't say nickel and dime, but, $50 to $75. And you got to cross that $100 threshold, we found, to get a good act that people will come for and enjoy. And so that's largely what's driven that, has been that entertainment piece.
Okay, thank you.
So one other thing I'll just mention real quick at the bottom of that large sheet I provided, and I know this touches upon the capital pieces, but some of the things that we're taking a look at, I've been working with Mr. Becker and talking to Commissioner Hill, is just looking at some things I think Commissioner Sutherland even brought to our attention about condition of some of the sidewalks in the area. They need some attention, whether it's a full rip-out, replace, or slab jacking. We're indicating some dollars to be allocated to that. And I think that's something for a future discussion, but I just wanted to touch upon that because the levy district isn't new anymore. And in order to kind of keep up with what we've got here, I think, some of the things we've done with the improved lighting down here have been a big benefit, but we've got some maintenance issues we need to get into, street striping, kind of basic things, but they would obviously be something that would be identified as part of a TIF expenditure. We're talking about a community branding initiative right now, and one of the things that is likely to come out of that is some sort of wayfinding or gateway signage. I know that comes out from time to time. What is our brand when people come into East Peoria? What is it saying about us? And I think that if you look at the existing signage that's out there, it could use a little TLC. And so it's something that likely comes out of that discussion. So what the timing is of that, I kind of throw that out there as a placeholder, but something we should probably be thinking about, whether it happens next fiscal year or the future one. And then the other piece I wanted to touch upon is Commissioner Hill and I have been talking about with staff a permitting software package. And one of the premises of the vacant and foreclosed property program was that would generate some revenues to be able to cover that cost. We look like we're on track to do that. We're going through a kind of a deep dive with what that permitting software has to do for us, how that needs to work out. So that's a piece that's going to take a few months, but we're hopeful by the next 90 to 120 days we'll have a pretty good handle on what it is that we need and what the costs are going to be associated with that. So another piece that's just mentioned here, it's not inserted in the budget at this point, but there is a revenue component to offset that cost.
I go back, speaking of that, I know it's come up here in a council meeting or two, most recently on that program that we implemented. I'd be interested in taking a look at that program as well. I know we've spoke of it, possibly making some changes that we deem to be necessary. I mean, when we implemented it, we were going in blind saying, let's go in and give this an attempt. If we have to make some adjustments, we make adjustments. But based on some concerns, I'd be interested in knowing if we have any future discussions on where we might tweak that.
We're actively working on something with Commissioner Hill. Staff had put together a couple of ideas for exceptions, some tweaking to the code, and that's something that we're taking a look at and should be able to bring forward here at some point in the future. But know that on the revenue side, it looks like we're on track for at least the first year to be somewhere in that $27,000 to $30,000 revenue range, which, like I said, it was intentionally designed to offset costs for something that would improve the efficiency of the department and our processes, and make it a lot more public friendly.
Perfect.
So with that, I'd like to introduce Mr. Cole. He's our inspections and building maintenance director. Sorry, you got more titles than that. But,
That's okay.
Robert oversees those components, and we work very closely together on the code enforcement and building inspections, but certainly he gets much more in the weeds with those.
Thanks, Ty, and I appreciate Mayor and the commissioners. I also want to thank Jeff Becker for going through this, and especially Commissioner Hill for challenging us to go a different direction when it came to budget alignments and being accountable for every one of those line items. So I will delve right in. I want to touch on page 1 real quickly.
He's on page 5, right? Are you on page 5? or-
I just want to briefly just go through the revenues, if I may.
Okay. Yep.
Some things we don't talk too much about, but I wanted to just bring kind of the light, some of the revenues that the department brings in, roughly permitting fees, roughly we bring in about $100,000 worth of various permit fees. One of the, I wanted to touch on that really changed, and that was the electrical permit fees. It's up about probably more like 100%. And I want to talk briefly because, we used to, we're seeing a downslide or kind of a flattening when it comes to overall building permits. We're at an all-time low as far as new residential homes. Commercial is up and down, but it's pretty flat. But what the significant change between the electrical permits, and that is all of the new solar projects that are coming to our city of East Peoria. A lot of residents are taking advantage of the tax credits to put solar panels on their homes. So that is kind of that reflection of that particular line item when it comes to electrical, which would be 342 under that. But the other revenues that we looked at are staying pretty flat. I did want to recognize the electrical aggregation funding that maintains somewhere around that $70,000 we bring in, and we offset a lot of our energy programs or energy efficiency programs, our HVAC, our lighting of the new downtown, East Side Center Gymnasium, HVAC projects. If you remember, a number of years ago, we done the gymnasium, which was about a $210,000 project. That money came out of this electrical aggregation revenue that we bring in. And that's just a small piece of what the residents and the small business owners pay for us to be able to manage their energy purchasing agreements. So I did want to just speak briefly on that, and also the code enforcement receipts, that's 381. That is, we've been really diligent about getting after and trying to get these liens paid. A number of years ago, we hired an attorney on commission that would go after, he's a collection attorney, that would go after a lot of them fines that we were never able to retrieve or have the people pay. So that brings in somewhere right around that $8,000 annually. It's fallen down a little bit. I think a lot of the larger projects or the larger fees eventually got paid, or we exhausted all means in the court system. So does anyone have any questions in regards to the revenues? Thank you. We'll move on to page 5 and 6, public properties. As you can see, it's up and down. We had some increases. I can kind of go over the maintenance wages. The maintenance wages went up a little bit. That was kind of a line or coordinator more closely to our maintenance tech. And then obviously the annual increase. Over time, I try to keep...
Hey, Robert, real quick, if you don't mind, just so I can clarify that for those that may not know. Too, with these positions, in fairness to Robert, with this increase, we had a gap there where now we've got somebody up to speed that we didn't for a while, so that's kind of reflective in this. So I wanted to point that out.
Yes, thank you, Mayor.
The 175 increase is incorporated in this, but in addition to that comes the other full positions that we hadn't had filled for a while, so that's also included.
Correct. Yeah, thank you, Mayor.
Yeah.
For ones that don't know, the Facilities Department is actually 2 employees. One is a union HVAC tech, and the other one is a maintenance coordinator, which is more of a management role, and obviously myself. And I commend them literally just because of the simple fact that we take care of a lot of buildings, over 40 buildings within Public Works, Fire Department, police stations, East Side Festival, there's a lot of buildings that we touch every day. And them guys do an excellent job trying to balance everything out within renovations and, and street lighting upgrades and just a lot of things. We're a busy division, that's for sure. But I appreciate them too. Moving right along, With the overtime, again, I put $1,500 in there. That shows a 50% increase. The likeliness that we'll ever have too much overtime, we've kept it pretty flat, if not zero. But I did want to include a little bit more money, just in case our maintenance tech needs to be called in for some additional responsibilities that we've taken with Public Works and the wastewater treatment plant project and a lot of those other responsibilities that we've assumed. Moving right along with the part-time wages, I think I wanted to briefly talk. We did eliminate a position. The Code Enforcement Officer 2 has been eliminated. We're kind of utilizing our full-time residential building inspector to kind of fulfill those additional duties. But we did ask for a maintenance helper, or what I call a co-op student we'd be fine with through the high school, to kind of help us out on the facilities end, just for a lot of that cleaning and furnace filter changing and just some other duties that would help us out greatly. Moving right along, if nobody has any questions in regards to that, engineering and architectural fees, we kept at a minimum. 019 contractual inspection fees, that kind of counterbalances what I wanted when we looked at the revenue. That's pretty much stayed about the same, maybe a little increase. Contractual services, that increase was based off of the cleaning contract. It did increase this year. So we're hoping within other efficiencies that we can maintain that around that amount. So printing pretty much stayed, maybe a little increase on that. 023, the postage, I think we learned that that goes up and down depending on certified and court hearings and stuff like that. So I think we felt pretty comfortable about that. 025, which would be travel training, we're constantly altering that year to year. That comes out of some UST certifications. Thankfully, last year, the underground storage tank certification now went from a 2-year to 3 years, so we can bank that out another year. But I think we tried to decrease that a little bit, staying in line with this budget. Moving right along to do subscription publications, we increased that because we are looking at the adoption of the 2018 International Building Codes being adopted this year. That's one of the things we'll be coming back later in the year to talk to you about. And it just includes some other memberships and stuff like that. 044, utility phones. We found some efficiencies with that, so we were able to drop that by about $1,500. 045, that pretty much stayed around the same. 050, building and maintenance repair. We found some efficiencies using TIF and some motel hotel to decrease that by $5,000. 051, which is maintenance and repair of equipment, we did the same for that. There's some other advantages to use TIF and motel hotel funds. Maintenance and repair of vehicles, we decreased. One of the things I did want to point out in my budget, and that is we are asking for a new vehicle for our HVAC tech. The current one that we're running out of is a 2006 Ford Econo van with a utility box on it. And we're finding that it's starting to cost us some significant money in repairs. So we are requesting, some monies to be able to replace that vehicle. Rental payments, about the same. We found some efficiencies, reduced that. Other operating expenses, a lot of that's about half of that is just property taxes on some properties that we have to pay property taxes on. The rest is, attorney fees, some maintenance, tools and stuff that have to be rotated out. 071 is demolitions. We had an IDA grant last year for $55,000. We're going to try to utilize all that. As you know, a lot of this is all based on the court hearings and how things move through the court system. I will tell you that I had Joe Boyer, our residential building inspector, put together what we were thinking in the next couple of years, and we got a couple properties that are going to cost quite a bit of money for demolition and remediation. So I do want to just make sure you're aware, we totaled it up about $314,000. Obviously, they'll be staged. We filed some demolition action against at least one of them, so we'll keep you posted as things move along with the court proceedings on that.
Excuse me. Which attorney's handling this that you're talking about?
Miller, Hall, and Triggs?
Themselves?
Yes.
And is this the same proceeding that's up in federal court up in Chicago?
No,
Not yet?
not that we're aware of, no.
Okay.
Anybody else have any other questions in regards to demolitions?
I was going to chime in on that just briefly. One of the things that we found some success with, if there are opportunities, before we get to that point, that the demolition is really the option of last resort, that if there's opportunities to either get the property repaired or, if the city were to get the judicial deed over it, if we can find a new owner for it with a home on it, in many cases in these older neighborhoods, that is the best possible outcome because you can get that home rehabilitated. Because once you demolish a home in some of these older neighborhoods, you're not going to get one back
Now,
there again.
are we talking about the same property that I'm thinking about down in
We
Richland?
can't speak to
Well, not
specifics,
specific.
especially now with the legal thing, so I don't think this is the
And
place.
not specific properties necessarily, but talking about particularly ones where you've got a home on them is where we found some success if there's an opportunity to get them in the hands of other property owners.
$300,000 is a lot of money to be asking for.
Yeah, and as things move along, we hope we don't go there, but, we're all, and I imagine we're going to speak a little more in depth on a working session in regards to at least the one property that something needs. It's a chronic nuisance, but we'll move on with that. Office supplies, again, we done an increase there. We do a lot of forms, labels, permit cards. A lot of that's, we're running out of a lot of what we had in inventory, so we're going to have to increase a little bit of that. Safety equipment and supplies really didn't change much. I added an additional $200. We've got some harness replacements that need to be swapped out this year. And then 115, which is motor fuel and lubrications, and that stayed pretty flat, $3,000. I did want to briefly talk about the new pumps and the efficiencies and the preventive maintenance end on it when it comes in regards to fleet. And TJ at Public Works has been a great asset to the city. We've worked closely with him on fuel purchases, how we're going to integrate the diesel tanks down at Public Works, some other sites that have fuel tanks. Eastside Center, I do believe, has a fuel tank also, and to try to kind of get a grip on all purchases in regards to fuel. So one of the things that's nice about the new fuel pumps and the software is going to be this fleet preventive maintenance on it. So the officers or whoever's using the actual, filling station will actually have to put in their odometer reading and the fleet number and obviously their badge number or their employee ID. So I think that's going to help Public Works and fleet, mostly when it comes to this new responsibility, is to be able to gauge a lot of their preventative maintenance on mileage for the vehicles. So I think it'll be an attribute most definitely to help Public Works with the preventative maintenance of the fire engines and police cars especially. So, cleaning and maintenance supplies, that went up just a little bit, and and that's really all of the paper supplies, toilet paper, air fresheners, stuff like that. But we had seen an increase in the can liners and paper towels. And the other thing is we don't rent out or lease mats at most of our city buildings. We actually purchase the mats as you come in. And then we have our cleaning contract clean them instead of having it subcontracted out. But eventually you got to replace the mats, so I did increase by $500 to.
And I just,
Go ahead.
to that point, I will tell you, just from my previous job, owning those mats and having them clean the way we do it is a lot more cost-effective.
Oh, absolutely, and that's why we did it.
Share that with you.
That's why we did it, Mayor, that's for sure. So 150 is really, I'll let Jeff maybe speak about this if you want to in regards to the building and land purchases.
Yeah, that's just a loan payment on that. There's a couple years left on that.
Loan payment on
okay.
what?
That's a loan payment for the Coles property. It's been on there for forever.
On the coals.
Oh, yeah.
On the
that-
what?
The Cole
Coles.
property, that's another
Coles.
one of our aces in the hole. We moved Applebee's and all the costs related to
Okay,
that.
yeah.
Thanks, Jeff. And then the last item I have, and that is building construction improvement, and that's really the electrical aggregation money that I spoke about as a revenue source. This kind of shows you kind of what we've got lined out for this coming fiscal budget for HVAC replacement at Station 3, two units, and then East Side Center for 3 units that we're looking at. Well, that'll leave us somewhere around that $35,000. I know we looked at an electric car that we could possibly purchase for code enforcement and building inspection, but I went ahead and took that out, and we'll use that $35,000 elsewhere.
Ignore him.
Excellent.
Ignore him.
Good move, Robert.
No,
Yeah, yeah.
Ignore him.
Well played.
It's still in there.
That's it for me.
Well, that'll be
Does
part of the
anyone have any
capital
questions in regards to the budget or anything else?
Go ahead, Dan. We'll try to stay on point to wrap up at 7.
First of all, I appreciate you mentioning that about TJ. TJ is, man, he's such an asset, and I'm glad that he's in Public Works. He does a great job. I was a little thrown off earlier. You're only requesting $30,000. I know you mentioned $300,000, but $30,000 is all that's requested in the demolition line item, correct? Okay. And one thing I'll say to that, I know there are times, I won't mention the street or the house, we had a house years ago that the public for years were trying to get us to work through demolition. And I know it was a long, tedious, and expensive process for the city, but the public was demanding that we did it. And I know sometimes those could be expensive. I'm not going to debate about what does or doesn't need done, but I at least understand how those costs can be higher than we would like them to be.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Commissioner. And anyone that wants to talk, come see me, and we'll go through the numbers, we'll go through the properties, and, it's not a secret, so.
We do have a couple of homes that are coming in front of council next week that are ones that we acquired through judicial deed, and then they're being purchased by private property owners that are going to rehabilitate them. And so those are the wins that we like to see, that we don't have to go through the demolition expense and get those properties back up on the tax rolls.
Perfect. Any other comments from the council? Don, do you have any questions for? Thank you, gentlemen, appreciate it. Before we wrap things up, the one department that falls under Mr. Becker, just worth noting here, for transparency, the IT department. I know people look at that and see that big jump in contractual services, that's on page 6. And I just want to point out that we no longer have IT staff that's third-party, outsourced. So some of those numbers under that category, even with the IT staff gone, you don't see the IRMRF and some other things that were factors with when we did have city employees. So, the end result down there is in our favor, but just wanted to point out there's some additional costs that were attributed to having our own IT staff that you don't see reflected in that one. So, Jeff, did you want to say anything about that real quick, or?
No, I think you covered
Okay.
it pretty well. There's a 1% decrease there, and as the mayor said, healthcare, pension, IMRF, Social Security, that stuff were in the appropriate funds for that. So those savings you don't see here.
And I just want to point out, Hard Technologies is who we're utilizing, and we've seen a lot of improvements. They've done a great job. They're there when we ask them to be there, and I think they've lived up to that expectation to date, so I just wanted to point that out. Scott, did you have want to give you free rein here, man? You got a couple minutes? No? You save it for later? No problem. Listen, this has been a great process to go through. I know this is just the first go-around here on the operating side. So my ask of the city council members, please go through this yourselves. Any questions or recommendations you want to bring forward, please do so here in the very near future so we can kind of fine-tune the operational side. That way, it sets us up going into our meeting 2 weeks from now, where we have the capital discussion. So once again, I appreciate all the department heads. I know it was a long night. I didn't get food by design. The goal here was to wrap it up by 7 and get everybody on their way, so. Any other comments from the council before we adjourn?
Yeah, usually well before 7s.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Okay,
I'm good.
perfect. I would seek a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Decker. Roll call?
Commissioner Decker?
Aye.
Hill?
Aye.
Mingus?
Aye.
Sutherland?
Aye.
Mayor Call?
Aye.
All present voting aye, Your Honor.
Thank you very much. We are adjourned.